I'm going to quote from a famous ex-president, paraphrase. Well, here we go again. When I was first elected to the legislature in 2002, the state provided 2/3 of the funding for our higher education system. As Senator Cohn indicated, now the state provides 1/3 of the funding for our higher education system. We've been cutting and cutting and cutting for 15 years. There have been a few years in there where we've managed to increase, but we never quite clawed back to the level of funding when I first came in to office, after you account for ordinary inflation in the higher education sector. So when we come in here and complain, and when our constituents complain about tuition increases, as others have said, there's a reason for it. It's because the state has failed in our obligation and our responsibility to provide the funding for our higher education system. And I'm most particularly concerned about the University of Minnesota. I mean, I get the politics of it. There's a Men's State bricks and mortar institution in probably every legislative district, almost every legislative district in the state, certainly far more than University of Minnesota physical campus locations. And so the political pressure on each member here to make sure they try to get funding for their Men's State institution in their district, in their community, is pretty intense. And I respect that because those are important places for higher education. But if you look for the political support for the University of Minnesota, it has to be about more than what's in your district. Even how many students or families in your district have attended the U. It has to be based on a bigger picture, a grander scheme, a higher understanding of what the University of Minnesota means to all of Minnesota. It is the premier research institution in the state. You know why we have Medtronic? Because we had the University of Minnesota. And if you look at the entire medical products industry that's in Minnesota, which is centered largely around the first and most successful company, Medtronic, you can see the University of Minnesota grads working throughout there. Businesses all around Minnesota collaborate and partner with the University of Minnesota on research projects because the scientific expertise that is at the University of Minnesota is not replicated anywhere else in the state. A very important mission of the University of Minnesota is exactly that research that provides scientific breakthroughs that can be converted to business opportunities and jobs. And that's not to say anything about the other important things that they do, like those scientific breakthroughs that help save lives, such as from Senator Isaacson's friend. University of Minnesota brings in, I don't know what the number is now this year, $700 million or so in federal research grants. It's an amazing amount of money. It's a huge component. It's about 1/3 or so of the money it takes to run the university, too. And they employ some of the best and the brightest graduate students and researchers and professors in the entire country. That's what has made the University of Minnesota a magnet and attraction from around the world for students to come here to Minnesota. And many of them, they come here and they stay here. And they raise their families here and they build their businesses here. If the University of Minnesota isn't adequately funded, the best and the brightest Minnesotans will look elsewhere. And I know very close to home that happens, because the opportunities that they want aren't available at the University of Minnesota because of a shortage of resources. And we will have fewer people coming in from the international scene, from around the world, to come here. The best and the brightest students from around the world who are looking and have their pick of places to come as graduate students won't be coming here as often. And frequently they come to departments that, if you're talking about the STEM areas in particular, that are well-funded research departments. They have laboratories with state-of-the-art equipment. They've got star professors. And you've got graduate students or potential graduate students that have their choice of where to go. They're going to be looking at these things. And they're going to want to know that they're going to come to an institution that is cutting edge on these things. And every time that we fail to properly fund the University of Minnesota, we diminish our future economy, we diminish our future quality of life in Minnesota. So I absolutely agree with the previous speakers that the legislature is to blame for tuition increases at the University of Minnesota, and frankly at Min State as well. Because our failure to fund those institutions causes them to have to raise the money to pay for the educational services they provide from some other source. In fact, that's probably why they get cut so badly when we have deficits in this state, because we as a legislature know that they have another source of revenue to keep their doors open. But that's a very short-sighted approach, members, a very short-sighted approach. It's gotten to the point, and I've said this unfortunately for a number of years now, it's gotten to the point where one could accurately describe this not as the University of Minnesota, but the university in Minnesota, because the public tax dollars are only paying for about a third of that institution's costs of operation. It's really more of a private system now with some state or public support. And it really pains me to say that, because yes, this higher ed target could have been much better if the majority weren't so fixated on tax cuts. Because I can guarantee you that you're not going to find a whole lot of the people receiving their tax cuts at the end of this legislative session saying, I'm going to take my tax cut and write out a check as a donation to the University of Minnesota because I think that's where my money should go. And they're not going to write out a check and send it to the Department of Transportation and say, here, use this to help fix the potholes on the highway out in front of my house. And they're not going to take that tax refund and write out a check and send it to the Department of Human Services and say, use this to pay for the personal care attendant that's taking care of my neighbor's grandmother, or the grandmother of someone I don't even know. They're not going to do that. And so, yes, to a large degree, people know how to spend their money and they spend it well. But the state is the method by which we act collectively as a community, how we make collective decisions to prioritize in Minnesota what can be done that is not easy for individuals to fund on their own. And when we fail in that responsibility in the higher education arena or any of the other budget areas that we'll be making decisions on in the next few days, we suffer collectively as well. So I will challenge you, when you get that constituent call that complains about tuition increases, be honest with them. Tell them that they might not have had to face that kind of a tuition increase if we'd made different priority choices in our budget this year. I don't think that this bill is worthy of a vote for a variety of reasons, including the reasons that Senator Cohn was very careful to explain about the balance between Min State and the University of Minnesota, because it does not recognize the priority that we need to set, even a balance of priority that we need to set on the University of Minnesota in this bill. Senator Fischbach, I have a great deal of respect for you and the work that you do, but this bill has shortchanged the University of Minnesota and as a consequence is shortchanging Minnesota's future. I urge members to vote no.